All right, everyone. Hello and welcome into a new era of Minnesota Vikings football. It is the first day of the offseason, and it is the first day that we are without a head coach or a general manager for the first time in 8 years. It has finally happened. The end of an era has arrived. We will begin a new era of Minnesota Vikings football with the dawn of tomorrow. Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer have both been fired. They've been given the boot as of 9 a.m. Eastern this morning. I was shocked. I just have to begin and say that I was shocked when I saw Rick Spielman's name attached to that story that came across the wire this morning. Couldn't believe it. Didn't see that coming. It's the right move, and I agree with it. But I just didn't think that the Wilfs would have the guts to get rid of a guy that they've had blind loyalty to for the past 16 years. It's incredible that they are finally seeing the light. It just, the things that they said today feels like that they have heard myself and you, the fans, who are starving for a championship, starving for consistent, sustained success as we continue to try to find that elusive first Super Bowl win. I'm floored. I'm floored that this has happened. So this is going to be my reaction to the news and events that have transpired today. We're going to talk about Mike Zimmer, We're going to talk about Mike Zimmer, Rick Spielman, what the Will family had to say, a couple of player reactions, and then I'm going to give you all of my reactions in real time as we go through this. I'm going to try to do this quick because college football national championship game is on. Go Georgia. All right. So let's begin with Rick Spielman. I think this is the easiest of the bunch. We all saw the writing on the wall, and I think he did too as the season wore on, because as we talked about, this season was just too much of a roller coaster. Too many ups, too many downs, and the downs were bad. Losing to the Lions, all of the close games, and then it felt like the first half of the Bears game for Week 18 that this team just quit. That game started off like absolute garbage, and it was not good. So Rick Spielman got a little bit more aggressive in front of the media, in front of the podium, talking about his players in public and just interacting with the media. It seemed like his attitude had definitely changed. There's a lot of things that we can point to for the reason that he was fired. I mean, he was reportedly criticized heavily for the construction of his coaching staff. We can all agree with that, with all of the nepotism in his hiring choices. You know, friends and family get jobs that probably could have went to very well qualified candidates. And it's funny because he said yesterday in the post-game press conference after Justin Jefferson didn't get the record, that he didn't care about, he doesn't care about records, he cares about wins. And it sounds like he didn't surround himself with the right people in order to achieve more wins that would have saved his job. So the irony is just paramount. He was also reportedly antagonistic with offensive coaching staff throughout the last couple of years. I didn't really get a time frame on that, but honestly, you could look at the turnover at the offensive coordinator position for the 8 years that he's been here. The entire tenure of the Mike Zimmer era was just shuffling offensive coordinators in and out. And then I think in the coming months or years, we're going to find out what happened with them and North Turner and why that ended. You know, John DeFilippo, they lose Kevin Stefanski, Pat Shurmur gets a new job, Gary Kubiak, Clint Kubiak, who is easily the worst of them all, and just no adaptation to the offense as the rules have changed. And you look around the league and you see what is successful, and they're still stuck in 1995. 2 straight losing seasons, no division titles since 2017, missed the playoffs for 3 of the last 4 years, under 500 since 2019, 700 days of sub 500 football, and then what was supposed to be his prime accomplishment, turning this Minnesota Vikings defense into a feared top 10 unit. He did for a while, but the last 2 years, clearly he's lost his touch. So it was time for a change. He had to go. And we all agree with that. Now, let's flip over to Rick Spielman and talk about him, because this is a shocker in my opinion. But it kind of makes sense because, number one, you can't have the guy transition to a new position in the organization, wherever that might be on the structural totem pole, and then you allow him to influence in the choice of his successor, and then also just be there prying and looking over his shoulder as he tries to do the job that Rick Spielman couldn't. So it makes sense to keep that environment out of the Minnesota Vikings facilities and let the new GM be the guy, right? So that makes sense to me. Rick Spielman's had a couple of brutal drafts recently. The most recent one, just the most brutal of them all. I think Christian Darrisaw is going to be great. But 4 third-round picks that barely saw the field this year and were mostly inactive for the entire season. You can't build a team like that and expect to win. He had to hit on more draft picks for this to be successful after all the money he gave to Kirk Cousins, and it just didn't happen. There was a recent run of bad trades that made no sense. He was getting raked over the coals by other teams. Yannick Ngakoue 2 times. Mike Hughes trading him to the Chiefs for next to nothing. Chris Herndon for a 4th-round pick. Blah. And then Stephen Weatherly, for whatever reason, they got rid of him, which I think Weatherly was complaining about playing time. They got basically next to nothing in return for him, and then created a thinner backup situation at the position that they were already thin at, which led to G.J. Wanham this year leading the team in sacks with, I think it was 7. I think the signing of Kirk Cousins, not the first time but the second time, is ultimately what did him in. That extension, in my opinion, made no sense whatever. I know at the time that they needed to do so because they needed cap relief. It saved them $10 million under the cap that year. You could also point to the first signing, that $84 million contract as the beginning of the end, because that was the first of its kind in 2018. There was no such thing as a fully guaranteed contract in the NFL up until that point, and we did the first one. Ultimately, it was his own undoing, because now we're in a situation after the first signing and now the extension where we will be faced with a $45 million cap hit for Kirk Cousins next year if he is still with the team. I believe that is going to force the team to make a wildly unpopular decision with half the fan base to trade him, because they just aren't going to be able to make it work. The visions didn't align, I don't think. I don't think the visions aligned between Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer on how they wanted this team to function and perform and succeed. I think that Rick Spielman was gearing more towards offense. If I could sort of just glean from what he did in the draft with Alexander Mattison, Irv Smith Jr., he got a real good steal in Justin Jefferson. I think he kind of lucked into that one, but he did. He could just never figure out the quarterback. He could never figure out the offensive line. And then Mike Zimmer was left with table scraps for defense over the last 4 years because they just couldn't afford anything except for loyalty contracts to aging veterans. And that's also a Rick Spielman criticism. Some of the reactions we saw on the internet today, social media, and in general, Rick Spielman put out a statement. He reportedly spoke with the team after he was fired, something that Mike Zimmer did not do. And it's actually funny that we did not hear from Mike Zimmer. He didn't put out a statement until right before I hit record on this video. A little brief statement, about 3 paragraphs. He ended it with, I'm sorry that we couldn't get it done. So take that for what you will. Real just old man vibes. Old man yells at cloud, if I could put it that way. The Wilf family, Mark and Ziggy Wilf, spoke today to the media. They put out a statement. They had a lot of great things to say. I want to share with you a couple quotes from that statement. Number one, they said, quote, "While these decisions are not easy, we believe it's time for new leadership to evaluate our team so we can consistently contend for championships." They also said, "We are determined to have sustained success and bring Vikings fans the Super Bowl championships they expect and deserve." And I wrote so many exclamation points on those quotes, and I underlined them hardcore, because that is what we have been saying all along. That is what we want. We don't care about stats. We don't care about one and done in the playoffs. We want sustained, consistent success. It's almost like they saw that one video that I said, I forget what video it was. I'll have to go back and look through them. But I was talking about a comparison with the Green Bay Packers and how they've been successful. Matt LaFleur over the last 3 years, 13-3, 13-3, 13-4, number 1 seed in the playoffs, getting all their players back. They're going to rest up. They're going to be ready to go. The Super Bowl for the NFC goes through Lambeau Field this year. That should be us every season. There's no reason it can't be. We have to start thinking higher, setting our sights higher. So I'm just so thrilled to hear from the Will family that sustained success and Super Bowl championships are their goal. And I'm taking them very seriously, because what they did today cost them a lot of money. Firing Mike Zimmer and firing Rick Spielman at the same time are going to be 2 huge checks that they have to cut. 2 huge checks, because they were both signed under contract until 2023. Those 2 extensions that they did, giving them 3 years extensions, was a little bit of a fault of their own, but they're going to pay for that, and immensely, I imagine. So it's good to see that they are willing to sort of risk their own profits, their own money, if you could put it that way, in the name of victory, success, and championships. That's what I want to hear. That's exactly what I want to hear. Good move, ownership. I can't believe this is the first time I agree with billionaires. We saw also Mark Wilf said that the Vikings need clear communication and collaboration in their new leadership selection. So that kind of gives you an idea of what they're going to be looking for in the next guys to run the show, both for general manager and Mike Zimmer. And that kind of alludes to the last point here with the player reactions from Eric Kendricks and Brian O'Neill that we saw today when they were speaking to the media. Eric Kendricks was asked, what he'd like to see from the next head coach, and he said, quote, "I don't think a fear-based organization is the way to go." Wow, that's very interesting for a veteran who is very good at what he does to come out and say that less than 24 hours after his head coach, the only head coach that he's ever played for, was fired. And that just kind of gives you some insight into what the culture of the Minnesota Vikings locker room was for the last couple of seasons. And I kind of can see this because you think back to 2017, that miraculous run where everything went right. Just think back to those games where they scored touchdowns and they celebrated as a team, and they had some very fun celebrations, duck, duck, gray duck. They did the Thanksgiving feast sitting around Stephon Diggs, pretending to be the centerpiece, holding the football, pretending to eat Thanksgiving dinner. It was a fun football team. Compare that to this year's team, not fun at all. They look like they're just there to collect a paycheck, punch in, punch out, go home. I think that Justin Jefferson is on an island in terms of, competitiveness. He comes from LSU that won a national championship, that just spits out wide receivers that are glorified Pro Bowlers and all pros in the NFL. Him, Jamar Chase, the list goes on. So I think that if you just look how not fun that this team was, and I've heard some people call them unlikable, it kind of makes sense because I think Mike Zimmer was bogging them down with his old style Bill Parcells 1992 attitude, and nobody bought into it. Also, there was a quote from Brian O'Neill who said, when asked about, what does that mean, what ownership said, what do they mean by collaboration and clear communication? And Brian O'Neill suggested, it would just be like little personal things here and there would make a big difference, like saying, "Hey, how you doing?" in the hallway. So it sounds like Mike Zimmer wasn't personable with his guys at all. He didn't care to get to know them. What's the word I'm looking for? I'm insinuating a lot, but I think you can sort of glean these. All of this from what they had to say in their quotes. It kind of reminds me of Matt Patricia going to Detroit after he left New England and trying to enforce and install the Patriot way in Detroit, which did not stick because Matt Patricia and everyone else tries to be Bill Belichick, right? They try to be Bill Belichick without the resume, and that's why it never works, because if you don't have the Super Bowls to back it up, they're not going to fall in line and they're not going to buy into the product. It worked for Mike Zimmer for a while, but I believe he just fell out of the loop, wouldn't modernize, and it bit him in the ass. So Matt Patricia was fired last year in Detroit before Dan Campbell took over. And I remember reading the stories about the culture for Detroit under Patricia was kind of harrowing, because they said things like the free agents would be so excited that the season was over, they would clean out their locker rooms knowing that they didn't have to come back to that hellhole. So I'm sure it wasn't that bad, but, it kind of reminded me of that. So those are really all of my notes for today. Just really shocked that Rick Spielman is gone. I can't believe that they had the guts to do that. I really thought that they were going to keep him. They begin the search for the new leaders now. It sounds like they're going to be really looking for, I don't want to say like player-friendly leaders, but leaders who are more interested in not just being X's and O's guys, who are going to be personable, who are going to give a shit about things like records. I mean, we saw Tom Brady forcing himself back into the game yesterday to give Rob Gronkowski another reception so he could get a $500,000 incentive bonus. And then he took himself out, in defiance of Bruce Arians. We're looking for stuff like that, where, they would actually have cared to get Justin Jefferson that record. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to talk about and be upset about. Like, he didn't get it. Oh, well, whatever. But it's a nuance where you can sort of see how they weren't interested in that sort of individual award in a meaningless exhibition where the season was already over. So that's my line of thinking on that. So let me know what you guys think about all of this. Some of the information that I've shared. It's a new era, and we're here, and it's finally happening, and this is what we wanted, and I'm just excited that it's finally going to be a thing. So subscribe, because we're in for a wild ride. I think this is going to be a wild off season. A lot of great coaching candidates, a lot of great GM candidates. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. It's going to do it for me, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.